The night was cold in Chicago. A relentless rain fell on the streets, soaking everything in its path. Underneath an overpass, huddled in damp cardboard and a threadbare blanket, was Ursula, a young woman whose beauty was hidden beneath layers of grime and tattered clothes. Her deep green eyes, shining despite the squalor surrounding her, wearily watched the raindrops sliding down the edge of the overpass. Her delicate features contrasted sharply with the harshness of her life. Her dark hair, though tangled, framed a face of perfect features that had rarely known the warmth of a real home. That night, Ursula couldn't sleep. Hunger and cold kept her from resting, but above all, it was the strange feeling that had been pressing on her chest since morning. Something inside told her she should move, that something was about to change. With a resigned sigh, she gathered her meager belongings in a worn backpack and began to walk aimlessly in the rain. Her steps led her to the city cemetery, a place where she sometimes found peace among the silence of the graves. No one bothered her there. The night watchman, used to seeing her, gave her a sympathetic nod as he let her pass. He knew she was harmless, just a young woman seeking refuge from the cruelty of the streets. She walked among the rain-soaked headstones, heading to her usual corner. But something caught her attention. A faint sound, almost imperceptible beneath the drumming of the rain. Ursula stopped, straining her ears. There it was again, a cry, a baby's cry. She followed the sound until she reached an imposing tomb, a family crypt of white marble that stood out from the others in its opulence. The gold plaque read, "The Caldwell Family." In front of the tomb, partially sheltered by the small roof of the crypt, but drenched by the rain that the wind carried, was a small bundle wrapped in a blanket. Ursula approached cautiously, her heart pounding. Pulling back the damp cloth, she found a baby. It was so small it hardly seemed real, with pale skin and lips slightly blue from the cold. His sunken cheeks and fragile body showed he hadn't been fed properly for some time. "Oh my God," Ursula whispered, taking the little one in her arms. The baby, feeling human contact, opened his eyes, as intensely blue as a spring sky. Despite his condition, there was something in his gaze, a strength that contradicted his physical weakness. Without a second thought, Ursula held him close to her chest, trying to give him some warmth. She looked around, searching for whoever could have abandoned the child, but the cemetery was deserted. "Who could leave you here, little one?" she murmured, rocking him gently. She then noticed a detail. A gold locket hung around the baby's neck. She examined it carefully. It had a name engraved on it, Matthew Caldwell, and a date. Ursula felt a chill. The tomb in front of which she had found the baby belonged to the Caldwells. It couldn't be a coincidence. She remembered reading in the newspapers they threw away near the shelter about the tragic death of the only son of Nicholas Caldwell, the real estate magnate whose fortune was as legendary as his ruthless business dealings. The baby cried again, a weak sound but full of need. Ursula made a decision. She couldn't leave him there. He would die before dawn. "Come on, little one," she said, wrapping him better with her own threadbare but dry scarf. "I'll take you somewhere where they can help you." She left the cemetery with the baby protected under her coat. She knew there was a hospital just a few blocks away. She had never gone inside, as places like that weren't for people like her, but the baby needed urgent care. As she hurried through the dark streets, Ursula felt a strange connection with the helpless little being. For a moment she forgot her own misery, focusing completely on saving him. Arriving at the hospital, the automatic doors opened before her. The bright white light inside momentarily blinded her. A nurse looked up from the reception desk, her expression changing from boredom to alarm when she saw the soaked and dirty, a young woman with a bundle in her arms. "Help, please!" Ursula exclaimed, uncovering the baby for them to see. "I found him abandoned. He's in bad shape." The reaction was immediate. The nurse called for a doctor, who appeared in seconds. They took the baby, quickly assessing his condition while bombarding Ursula with questions she could barely answer. "Where exactly did you find him? How long was he there? Did you see anyone nearby?" Ursula answered as best she could, but her attention was fixed on the little one. now surrounded by medical personnel who were working frantically to stabilize him. "He's severely dehydrated and hypothermic," she heard one of the doctors say. "We need to act fast." They rushed him away, leaving Ursula standing in the middle of the hallway, soaked and shivering, not only from the cold, but from uncertainty. A nurse, kinder than the others, offered her a blanket and a hot coffee. "You did the right thing bringing him in," she said. "A few more minutes and he wouldn't have made it." Ursula nodded, unable to speak. She sat down in one of the plastic chairs in the waiting room, away from the few people waiting for attention at that time of night. She felt the disapproving glances and disgusted gestures at her appearance, but she was too used to it to care. Hours later, as dawn began to timidly peek through the hospital windows, a doctor approached her. Ursula had fallen asleep, curled up in the uncomfortable chair, but woke up immediately. "The baby is stable," the doctor informed her, a middle-aged man with a serious but kind expression. "You saved his life, no doubt, but there's something strange. The locket he was wearing—" Ursula looked at him expectantly. "It belongs to the Caldwell family," the doctor continued. "We've contacted them. They'll be here shortly. They're influential people." She nodded, not knowing what to say. Of course they would come. A baby with a Caldwell locket wasn't something that could go unnoticed. "Can I see him before they get here?" she asked in a timid voice. The doctor hesitated, but something in Ursula's gaze convinced him. "Just a few minutes," he agreed. He led her through endless hallways to the neonatal intensive care unit. Through the glass, Ursula saw the little one in an incubator, connected to tubes and monitors. He looked so fragile in there, but his chest rose and fell regularly. He was fighting, surviving. "How old is he?" Ursula asked, resting a hand on the glass. "We estimate a few weeks," the doctor replied. "It's astonishing he survived so long with so little care." They remained silent for a few minutes, watching the baby. There was something about him that deeply touched Ursula's heart, an inexplicable connection that had led her to go out in the rain that night, to pass through the cemetery to find him. The silence was broken by a commotion coming from the hospital entrance. Authoritative voices, hurried footsteps. The Caldwells had arrived. "We better head back," the doctor said, guiding Ursula back towards the waiting room. Turning the corner of the hallway, they came face to face with a group of people. Leading the way was a tall man, elegant in bearing and with a piercing gaze. He wore an impeccable suit despite the hour, and his greying hair was perfectly combed. Beside him, an equally elegant woman, her face tense with worry. "Mr. Caldwell," the doctor greeted deferentially. "The baby is stable. You can see him now." But Nicholas Caldwell didn't look at the doctor. His eyes were fixed on Ursula, examining her from head to toe with an inscrutable expression. She lowered her gaze, suddenly aware of her deplorable appearance in the face of such opulence. "Is she the one who found him?" Caldwell asked, his voice deep and authoritative. "Yes, sir," the doctor confirmed. "If it weren't for her, the baby wouldn't have survived." Nicholas Caldwell took a step towards Ursula, who instinctively recoiled. "Look at me," he ordered softly. Ursula slowly raised her eyes, meeting the man's dark eyes. There was something familiar about them, something she couldn't identify. "Where exactly did you find him?" Caldwell asked. "In the cemetery," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "In front of your family's tomb." A shadow crossed the man's face. "Can I see the baby now?" he asked, turning back to the doctor, but without taking his eyes off Ursula. "Of course, this way." The group followed the doctor, leaving Ursula alone in the hallway. She should have left then, go back to the streets, to her life, forget the whole thing. But something held her back. She needed to know what would happen to the little one, to make sure he would be okay. Gathering all her courage, she discreetly followed the group to the neonatal unit. From a safe distance, she watched as Nicholas Caldwell looked at the baby through the glass, his expression unreadable. Then, after a brief exchange with the doctor, he was allowed to enter to see the little one up close. What happened next left Ursula paralyzed. The powerful Nicholas Caldwell, the man who, according to the papers, was incapable of showing compassion or weakness, simply broke down when he looked at the baby's face. He fell to his knees beside the incubator, silent tears rolling down his hitherto impassive face. Ursula watched the scene uncomprehendingly. What had Caldwell seen in the face of that baby to provoke such a reaction? Who was that creature she had found abandoned in the rain? The answer would come soon, changing forever not only the little one's life but also her own. The silence in the room was so thick it seemed to have a weight of its own. Nicholas Caldwell remained kneeling in front of the incubator while the nurses exchanged puzzled glances. No one dared to interrupt the moment. From her hiding place in the hallway, Ursula watched the scene, holding her breath. Nicholas's wife, Martha, a woman of aristocratic beauty and refined gestures, placed a trembling hand on her husband's shoulder. "Nicholas, what is it?" she asked in a barely audible voice. The businessman stood up slowly, without taking his eyes off the baby. His face, usually impassive, now revealed a mixture of emotions so intense it was almost painful to watch. "It's him, Martha," he murmured, his voice breaking. "It's Matthew." The woman paled, leaning against the wall for support. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Our Matthew passed away a long time ago. We buried him, you yourself." "Look at his face," Nicholas interrupted, pointing to the baby. "Look at his birthmark, just like our son's in the same place, and his eyes—" Martha approached the incubator tremulously. Looking at the little one, she brought a hand to her mouth, stifling a cry. Ursula didn't understand what was happening. How could this baby be the deceased son of the Caldwells? It was impossible. She took a step back, determined to leave before they noticed her presence, but bumped into a medication cart, causing a crash that drew all eyes to her. Nicholas Caldwell stared at her. "You," he said, pointing at her. "Don't leave." Ursula stood motionless like a trapped animal. A bodyguard accompanying the Caldwells approached her, blocking any way of escape. "I want to talk to you," Nicholas continued, his voice regaining some of its usual authority. "Alone." The doctor, uncomfortable with the situation, intervened. "Mr. Caldwell, we still need to perform DNA tests to confirm the baby's identity and notify the authorities about—" "Of course, doctor," Nicholas interrupted with a wave of his hand. "Do all the necessary tests. Meanwhile, this young woman and I have matters to discuss." He led Ursula to a small, empty conference room on the same floor. Despite her disheveled appearance, Ursula kept her head high, facing Nicholas's piercing gaze. Something inside told her she had no reason to fear him, at least not at that moment. "Sit down, please," Nicholas said, gesturing to one of the chairs. Ursula obeyed, her hands clasped in her lap to hide the trembling. "My name is Nicholas Caldwell," he began, although it was unnecessary to introduce himself. All of Chicago knew his name. "And I want you to tell me exactly how you found that baby." So Ursula did, recounting in a slow but firm voice the events of the previous night. She told him about her intuition, how something had led her to the cemetery on that rainy night, and the small bundle she found in front of the Caldwell family tomb. "Did you see anyone?" Nicholas asked when she finished her story. "Did you notice anything out of the ordinary?" Ursula shook her head. "The watchman let me in as usual. There was no one else. The baby was alone, soaked and cold." Nicholas stood up, pacing restlessly around the small room. His mind seemed to be working at full speed. "It's impossible," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "We buried our son Matthew a long time ago. I saw his body myself." He stopped, looking at Ursula, as if he had just remembered her presence. "Why were you in the cemetery at that hour?" he asked with sudden suspicion. Ursula tensed. "Sometimes I sleep there," she admitted without lowering her gaze. "It's quiet and safe. The watchman knows me. He knows I don't cause trouble." Nicholas observed her more closely, noticing for the first time the signs of her life on the streets. The rough hands, the extreme thinness under the layers of old clothes, the small scars of a precarious existence. Despite everything, there was a dignity in her, a presence that didn't go unnoticed. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ursula." "How old are you, Ursula?" "Old enough to take care of myself," she replied with a slight smile, avoiding the direct question. Nicholas nodded, respecting her evasion. "You saved that baby's life," he said finally. "Whoever he is, I owe you a debt of gratitude that I can't express in words." Ursula shrugged, uncomfortable with the thanks. Anyone would have done it. "No, not just anyone," Nicholas contradicted. "Most would have walked by or at best called 911 without getting personally involved. You not only brought him here, but you stayed all night, making sure he was okay." A silence fell between them, a moment of mutual recognition of the other's humanity beyond the social and economic differences that separated them. "When he leaves the hospital, what will happen to him?" Ursula asked, breaking the silence. "That depends on the DNA tests," Nicholas replied. "If he really is who I think he is, he'll come with me and my wife. And if he isn't?" Nicholas seemed surprised by the question, as if the possibility hadn't occurred to him. "He'll still come with us," he decided then and there. "We'll find him a good family if we can't keep him. You have my word." Ursula nodded, satisfied with the answer. She knew instinctively that this man, despite his reputation, wouldn't harm the little one. "Can I ask you something personal?" Nicholas said after another moment of silence. "You can ask, I don't guarantee an answer." "How did you end up like this?" he asked, gesturing vaguely at her appearance. Ursula tensed again, but decided to respond with honesty. "My mother died when I was little. My father, well, he found more comfort in the bottle than in taking care of me. I left home very young. I've survived as best I could since then." "Don't you have any family, friends? Who can help you?" "Life on the streets teaches you not to depend on anyone," she replied simply. Nicholas looked at her with a mixture of compassion and respect that Ursula wasn't used to receiving. "When all of this is cleared up, I'd like to help you," he said finally. "Not out of pity, but because I believe you deserve a chance. We all do." Before Ursula could respond, the door opened. It was Martha, Nicholas's wife. Her face showed signs of having cried, but there was a renewed determination in her gaze. "The doctor wants to talk to us," she said to her husband. Then she looked at Ursula and added, "You too." The three of them headed to the doctor's office, a Spartan but comfortable space. The doctor was waiting for them with a folder in his hands and an unreadable expression. "We have the preliminary results," he announced without preamble. "We've compared the baby's DNA with the samples we had on file at the hospital from your son, Mr. Caldwell." Nicholas took his wife's hand, both holding their breath. "It's a perfect match," the doctor concluded. "Genetically, this baby is identical to your son, Matthew." Martha let out a sob, while Nicholas closed his eyes, as if he needed that moment to process the news. "But that's impossible," Martha murmured. "The dead don't come back." "Science can't explain how this happened," the doctor admitted. "But there's no doubt about the results. This baby is, in genetic terms, your son." Ursula listened to the conversation, feeling like an intruder. She didn't understand how what she was hearing was possible. She had found an abandoned baby, but now it turned out that this baby was genetically identical to the Caldwell's deceased son. It was too strange, almost as if fate had guided her there that night. "Have you notified the authorities about this?" Nicholas asked, suddenly concerned. "Not yet," the doctor replied. "Given the extraordinary nature of this case, I wanted to discuss it with you first." "I appreciate your discretion," Nicholas said. "I'd like to keep this private for as long as possible while we investigate what exactly happened." The doctor nodded. "Understanding. The baby will need a few more days of intensive care before he can be discharged," he explained. "That gives us time to decide how to proceed." When they left the doctor's office, Ursula was about to leave, considering that her role in this story was over, but Nicholas stopped her with a gesture. "Don't go yet," he asked. "Please." There was something in his voice, a genuine emotion that contrasted with his usual public coldness, that made Ursula agree to stay. Martha, who had almost completely ignored her until then, approached her. "Thank you," she said simply, taking Ursula's hands in her own, "for saving our son." Ursula felt an unexpected emotion at that gesture. She wasn't used to being treated with such consideration, especially by people like the Caldwells. In the following days, the situation took on almost surreal overtones. Nicholas Caldwell, using his influence, secured rooms in the hospital for both his wife and Ursula, insisting that the latter was a relative who needed to be near the baby. He provided her with new clothes, hot meals, and everything she could need, despite Ursula's initial protests. "I don't want your charity," she had said on the first day. "It's not charity," Nicholas replied. "It's gratitude and perhaps a way to compensate a little for what fate has taken from you." Little by little, Ursula began to feel comfortable with the situation, visiting the baby regularly with Martha. Nicholas's wife, after the initial shock, had developed a kind of quiet friendship with the young woman. Both shared the concern for the little one, who was improving day by day under intensive care. "Can I ask you something?" Ursula said one afternoon, as they watched the baby sleeping in the incubator, now without so many tubes and monitors. "Of course," Martha replied. "How did your son die? The original one, I mean." The question hung in the air, laden with meaning and pain. Martha sighed, as if she needed to gather strength to answer. "It was a while ago," she began. "Matthew was only a few months old when he got very sick. The doctors couldn't do anything. It was a rare degenerative disease. They told us it was a miracle he had lived as long as he did." She paused, fighting back tears. Nicholas didn't take it well. He couldn't believe that all his money, all his power, couldn't save his only son. He became obsessed, searching for experimental treatments, consulting specialists from all over the world. But it was useless. Matthew passed away in my arms one night. He simply stopped breathing. Ursula listened in silence, moved by the story. After that, Nicholas changed. He became harder, more distant. He poured all his energy into business, building an empire as if that could fill the void our son left behind. "And now he's back," Ursula murmured, looking at the baby. "It seems so," Martha replied with a faint smile. "Although I don't understand how it's possible, but I'm learning not to question miracles, only to be grateful for them." That same night, as Ursula rested in the room that had been assigned to her, someone knocked gently on her door. It was Nicholas, with an unreadable expression on his face. "Can I come in?" he asked. Ursula nodded, intrigued. Nicholas entered and sat down in the only available chair, while she sat on the edge of the bed. "I've been doing some digging," he began without preamble, "about the night you found Matthew." Ursula waited, sensing that he had discovered something important. "The security cameras in the cemetery," Nicholas continued, "show something strange. A woman is seen leaving a bundle in front of our family tomb, but her face never appears in the images, as if she knew exactly where the cameras were." "Were you able to identify her?" Ursula asked. "Not for sure, but I have my suspicions." Nicholas took a photograph from the inside pocket of his jacket and handed it to her. It showed a young and beautiful woman, with dark hair and an intelligent gaze, dressed in a white lab coat. "Her name is Elena Montero," Nicholas explained. "She was one of the scientists who tried to treat Matthew before he died, a specialist in genetics. She disappeared shortly after my son's death. I thought she had left the country, but now..." He left the sentence hanging in the air, and Ursula understood the implication. "You think she cloned your son?" she asked directly, amazed to be having such a conversation. "It's the only explanation that makes sense, as impossible as..." "It seems," Nicholas admitted. "Elena had access to tissue samples from Matthew during his treatment. She had the knowledge and apparently the motivation to do something like that." "Why would she abandon him then?" Ursula questioned. "If she went to so much trouble to create him." "That's what I don't understand," Nicholas said, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "Unless..." "Unless what?" "Unless she was in danger," Nicholas concluded. "If human cloning was performed without authorization, it's a very serious crime. She could be on the run, and the baby was a burden she couldn't carry with her." "But why leave him specifically at your family's tomb?" Ursula insisted. "She could have left him at a hospital or at a church. She wanted me to find him," Nicholas replied with sudden certainty. "She wanted me to know who he was. The locket, the location, it was all carefully planned." A silence fell as they both reflected on the implications of this theory. "What are you going to do now?" Ursula finally asked. Nicholas looked directly at her, with an unwavering determination in his dark eyes. "I'm going to find Elena Montero," he said. "I need answers, and I want you to come with me." "Me?" Ursula exclaimed, surprised. "Why?" "Because you were the one who found Matthew. Because it seems that fate wants you to be part of this story, and because I trust you even though I barely know you." Ursula didn't know what to say. Life had taught her to be cautious with trust, to distrust the intentions of others, especially the powerful. But there was something about Nicholas Caldwell, a sincerity beneath his facade of a tough guy, that made her want to believe him. "When?" she asked simply. "Tomorrow. I have men looking for her. I think we've located her in a small house outside the city." Ursula nodded, tacitly accepting the proposal. Something inside told her that her path was irrevocably linked to that baby she had saved, and by extension to the Caldwells. What she didn't know was that the search for answers would lead them all to confront truths far deeper and more disturbing than any of them could imagine. Dawn was barely beginning to draw its first strokes across the sky when Ursula and Nicholas set off in search of Elena Montero. Martha had stayed at the hospital, jealously guarding little Matthew, who was showing more and more evident signs of recovery each day. Nicholas's car, an elegant black vehicle, glided silently through the empty streets of Chicago. Ursula, sitting in the passenger seat, watched the urban landscape gradually transform into residential areas and finally into a more rural environment. "Are you sure she's here?" she asked, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "My contacts located her in a secluded house a few miles from here," Nicholas replied without taking his eyes off the road. "She's been living under a false name, but it matches her description. And there's something else?" "What?" Ursula inquired, noticing the hesitation in his voice. "Reports from neighbors about a makeshift lab in the basement. Lights on all. Night medical equipment being moved. It's not conclusive evidence, but it's the best we have." Ursula nodded, feeling the tension building inside her. Part of her wished she hadn't gotten involved in this matter, to return to the simplicity of her previous life. But another part, stronger, knew that she was exactly where she needed to be. Finally, after traveling along a dirt road between pine and centuries-old oak trees, they arrived in front of a modest stone house. It looked abandoned, with the windows covered by thick curtains that prevented seeing inside. However, a thin column of smoke emerged from the chimney, betraying someone's presence. "Wait here," Nicholas ordered, turning off the engine. "Don't even think about it," Ursula replied with determination. "I've come this far. I'm going with you." Nicholas looked at her, surprised by her firmness, but finally nodded with a slight smile of approval. They approached the front door together. Nicholas knocked 3 times, firmly but without aggression. Eternal seconds passed without a response. He was about to try again when the door slowly opened. Before them stood a woman they immediately recognized as Elena Montero, although her appearance had changed radically since the photograph Nicholas had shown. Her dark hair, once long and shiny, was now short and unkempt. Her face, though still beautiful, showed evident signs of exhaustion and stress. But the most striking thing was her eyes, which revealed a mixture of fear and relief upon recognizing her visitors. "It took you less time than I expected, Nicholas," she said in a surprisingly serene voice. "Elena," he replied, maintaining a similar calm. "I think you have a lot of explaining to do." Elena gestured for them to enter. The interior of the house was austere but tidy, with shelves full of scientific books and a few framed photographs. In one of them, Ursula distinguished Elena next to an older man with a kind appearance, both in lab coats. "Sit down, please," Eleanor offered, pointing to a modest sofa. "I suppose you've come for the baby." "His name is Matthew," Nicholas said, with a firmness that made Eleanor shrink slightly. "And he is genetically identical to the son I lost. My son, whom you knew and treated before his death." Eleanor sighed deeply, as if she had been holding her breath for a long time. "Yes," she finally admitted, "he's a clone of your son. But there's much more to this story than you can imagine, Nicholas." She sat down opposite them, her hands clasped in her lap to control a visible tremor. "After Matthew's death, I continued to research his illness. It was so rare, so devastating. I felt I had failed him, that we had all failed him. She paused, looking directly at Nicholas. I discovered something, reviewing his tissue samples, a genetic anomaly that we hadn't detected before, which could explain why none of our treatments worked. This could mean significant advances for other children with similar conditions. And you decided to clone my son to test it, Nicholas interrupted, his voice trembling with barely contained indignation. No, Elena replied firmly. It wasn't like that. My mentor, Dr. Fernandez, she pointed to the photograph Ursula had noticed earlier, was working on therapeutic cloning techniques, purely theoretical research, nothing practical. When I showed him my findings about Matthew, he saw an opportunity, not only to advance science but to give a child who died too soon a second chance. Without our consent, Nicholas retorted, his anger beginning to give way to the moral complexity of the situation. We tried to contact you, Elena said, several times, but after Matthew's death, you became inaccessible. Your assistance blocked any attempt at communication, especially from people related to his treatment. Nicholas was silent, acknowledging the truth in those words. Grief had completely isolated him. We proceeded with the project in secret, Elena continued. We used the tissue samples we had from Matthew. The process was complicated. There were failures many, but finally we achieved a viable embryo. We implanted it in a surrogate mother, a nurse who worked with us and believed in what we were doing. Where is she now? Ursula asked, speaking for the first time since they entered. The house. A shadow of pain crossed Elena's face. She died during childbirth, she replied in a low voice. There were complications, unexpected. Dr. Fernandez also passed away shortly after, a heart attack. Suddenly I found myself alone with a newborn baby who was a clone of Matthew Caldwell, without support and with the constant fear of being discovered. Why didn't you come to me then? Nicholas asked, his tone softer now. Fear, Eleanor admitted. Fear of the legal consequences of your reaction. Human cloning is illegal. I could face jail time. And there was the baby, so vulnerable, so innocent in all this. So you abandoned him in the cemetery, Ursula concluded, the pieces finally falling into place. Eleanor nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. It was the hardest decision of my life, but I knew he would be found quickly, especially there, in front of the Caldwell's tomb. I put the locket on him so there would be no doubt about his identity. And then I fled. But he wasn't found quickly, Ursula said, unable to hide the accusation in her voice. He was exposed to the rain and cold. He could have died. I know, Elena sobbed, tears running freely down her face. I'll never forgive myself for that. I miscalculated. I thought the watchman would make his rounds sooner. A dense silence fell, charged with complex emotions, anger, understanding, guilt, forgiveness. There's something else you should know, Elena finally said, wiping away her tears, about Matthew, about his condition. Nicholas visibly tensed. The genetic anomaly I discovered, Elena continued, was corrected in the cloning process. This Matthew will not suffer from the same disease. He is completely healthy. The news washed over Nicholas like a wave, dragging him into a whirlwind of emotions. Ursula, watching his reaction, saw how relief, hope, and a kind of resigned sadness mixed on his face, probably thinking about the suffering the first Matthew could have been spared with this knowledge. Are you completely sure? He asked in a hoarse voice. Absolutely, Elena confirmed. The tests are conclusive. That's why I was so desperate to do this. It wasn't just a scientific experiment, Nicholas. It was an opportunity to correct what went wrong, to give a second chance. Nicholas stood up, pacing agitatedly around the small room. His mind, accustomed to making complex business decisions in seconds, struggled to process the ethical and emotional magnitude of this situation. What do you plan to do now? He finally asked Elena. Turn myself in, she replied with resignation. Face the consequences of my actions. It's the right thing to do. No, Nicholas said with unexpected firmness. Both Elena and Ursula looked at him surprised. What you did was ethically questionable, legally incorrect, and extremely risky, he continued. But you've also given my family a second chance we never thought possible, and your research could save many lives in the future. He approached Eleanor, facing her directly. I want you to come with us. To work for me, in your own laboratory. You'll continue your research, under proper ethical supervision, and you'll watch Matthew grow up knowing that you've helped give him the life he deserves. Are you serious? Eleanor asked, incredulous. I've never been more serious, Nicholas replied. Ursula watched the exchange, moved by the unexpected turn of events. She saw in Nicholas a man transformed by circumstances, capable of forgiving and recognizing the moral complexity of the situation. There's one condition, Nicholas added. No more human cloning experiments. Your research will focus on conventional genetic treatments, applying what you've learned to benefit other children with rare diseases. Elena nodded, tears of relief shining in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. I promise you won't regret it. On the way back to Chicago with Elena in the back seat, Ursula reflected on the strange twists her life had taken in such a short time, from sleeping under an overpass to being involved in a story worthy of a science fiction novel. Yet amidst all this madness, she felt she had found something she had been looking for a long time, a purpose, a genuine human connection. What are you thinking about? Nicholas asked, noticing her lost gaze. About how unpredictable life is, she replied with a slight smile. A few days ago, my biggest concern was finding a dry place to sleep. Nicholas looked at her briefly before returning his attention to the road. When all of this calms down, he said, I'd like to talk to you about your future. My future? Ursula repeated, puzzled. There's a place for you at the Caldwell Foundation if you want it, he explained. We need people like you, with your determination, your instinct, and your ability to connect with those who need it most. I don't have a formal education or experience in anything that could be useful, Ursula objected. That can be fixed. Education is acquired. Experience is gained. But the kind of humanity you possess, Ursula, that can't be taught. Nicholas's words hung between them, an implicit promise that her life, like Matthew's, could have a second chance. Arriving at the hospital, they found Martha in the neonatal unit, holding Matthew in her arms. The little one had been removed from the incubator and miraculously seemed to have regained almost all his strength. His cheeks, once pale, now showed a healthy pink hue, and his blue eyes, identical to those of the first Matthew, shone with life and curiosity. He's better, Martha announced with joy, although her expression changed when she saw Elena. What does this mean, Nicholas? Patiently, Nicholas explained everything to his wife. Elena's research, the discovery of the genetic anomaly, the cloning, the desperate circumstances that led to Matthew's abandonment in the cemetery. Martha listened in silence, her emotions fluctuating visibly between disbelief, anger, and finally, a kind of cautious acceptance. Eleanor will be staying with us, Nicholas concluded. She'll continue her research under our supervision, helping other children with diseases similar to that of our first Matthew. Martha looked at her husband, then at Eleanor, and finally at Ursula, as if assessing the seismic changes that had occurred in her life in such a short time. If that's your wish, she finally said to Nicholas before turning her attention to Ursula. And you, what will you do now? Ursula, who had remained in the background, stepped forward. Your husband has offered me a place at the foundation, she replied. I think I'm going to accept it. I'm glad to hear that, Martha said sincerely. Then, in a gesture that surprised everyone, including herself, she extended her arms, offering Matthew, Would you like to hold him? After all, you saved him. In a way, you gave him life for the second time. With trembling hands, Ursula took the baby. It was the first time she had held him properly, without the urgency of that rainy night. Matthew stared at her, as if recognizing her, and to everyone's amazement, he smiled. In that instant, something changed definitively within. Ursula, an absolute certainty that her life until then marked by daily survival would now have a greater purpose. She would not only be part of the Caldwell Foundation, she would be part of this extraordinary child's life, an additional guardian on his path. The following months passed like a dream for all those involved. Matthew was officially adopted by the Caldwells, a process facilitated by Nicholas's influence, and a carefully constructed story about the miraculous finding of an abandoned baby who turned out to be a distant relative of the family. Elena established her laboratory in a wing of the Caldwell Foundation facilities, dedicating herself to researching genetic treatments for rare diseases, especially those affecting children. Her work soon began to bear fruit, offering hope to families who, like the Caldwells at the time, faced devastating diagnoses. Ursula, for her part, completed her formal education thanks to the support of the Caldwells and became a key part of the foundation. Her personal experience made her a unique bridge between the most privileged and the most needy, able to navigate both worlds with empathy and effectiveness. One afternoon, almost a year after that rainy night that changed everything, Ursula was in the garden of the Caldwell mansion, watching Matthew play under the shade of a large oak tree. The little one, now bursting with health and energy, took his first tentative steps, laughing with each new accomplishment. Nicholas and Martha approached, sitting down next to her on the lawn. "You know," Nicholas said, looking at his son with pride, "sometimes I think about everything that had to happen for us to be here today. The right and wrong decisions, the coincidences, fate. If Eleanor hadn't done what she did, if you hadn't been in the cemetery that specific night, if you hadn't stopped to listen to that faint cry in the middle of the rain," Martha added. Ursula smiled, watching Matthew chase a butterfly that fluttered within his reach with fascination. "I think there are forces greater than us working in the universe," she replied. "Sometimes they guide us to where we need to be, even when we think we're lost." Matthew, as if he had sensed they were talking about him, turned to them with a radiant smile. Then, with determination, he took several wobbly steps until he reached Ursula, falling into her arms with a cry of joy. "He loves you," Martha said, observing the special bond between Ursula and the little one. "He may not consciously remember, but something in him knows you saved his life." "And she saved ours too," Nicholas added. "She gave us back hope when we thought we had lost it forever." Ursula hugged Matthew, breathing in the sweet scent of his hair. Her mind briefly traveled to her past, to the cold nights under the overpasses, to the hunger, to the loneliness. That time now seemed very distant, like a different life that someone else had lived. "Are you okay?" Martha asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "Perfectly," Ursula replied with a genuine smile. "I was just thinking about miracles, about how they sometimes appear in the most unexpected places, disguised as adversity." She looked at Matthew, who was now playing with a small toy in her lap, oblivious to the extraordinary story of his existence, to the incredible journey they had all taken to be there at that moment. "Some would call it science," Nicholas said, following her gaze. "Others fate. I prefer to call it what it is, an unexpected miracle." The four of them remained in the garden until the sun began to set, a family formed not by blood, but by the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together. On the horizon, the first stars of the night appeared, bright and promising, like the future that now stretched before them, a future that Ursula, for the first time in her life, was not afraid to face, because she now knew that even in the darkest nights, in the most desperate moments, the light always finds a way. And sometimes that light comes in the form of a faint cry in the rain, an abandoned baby, a miracle waiting to be discovered by someone with a heart willing to listen.